Hello, and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. The standard disclaimer applies. The thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, send questions or comments to our Twitter page at Mason Roundtable or on the Facebook event page for episode 139, Martinism. And for me, I'm John Rulo, past master of the Patriot Lodge, number 1957, in Fairfax, Virginia. Jason, who are you?
Hi, John. As you mentioned, my name is Jason Richards to be exact, Senior Warden of Acacia Lodge number 16 in good old Clifton, Virginia. Hopefully getting installed as Worshipful Master on the 3rd of December. Hope you all will join me for that August event. It's August event happening in December.
Nice catch. Nick, are you there? Phoning in Dr. Nick. Nope, can't hear you yet. Nick jumped in at the last minute, just squeaking by. So skipping over him, allow me to reintroduce.
It's for the best.
Yes, our guest host, again, our friend and brother, Jason Mitchell out of Utah. So welcome.
Hi, everybody.
The fill-in for Dr. Nick. Good. So let's, before we go and wait for Nick to introduce himself, let's talk about our sponsor. That's right. This episode of TMR has been sponsored by Masonic Revival. For those of you who have met Edgar Alejandro at various Grand Lodge events, you know he's an awesome guy and he has an awesome product. He's a double hitter. I don't know. It's baseball terminology. So, yeah, he's doing some great stuff. Go check him out at MasonicRival.com. Masonic Revival, not Masonic Rival. That's a different website. So I could hear someone going on GoDaddy right now, MasonicRival.com. But if you go to Masonic...
it's mine.
Got it. Nailed it. But on MasonicRevival.com, if you like free shipping, and who doesn't, and you're a fan of the show, make sure you put in the promo code for TMR. That's TMR as you check out, and you'll get free shipping. Yay! Isn't it about time for a Masonic Revival?
Yes, it is, John.
That's the right answer. Let's go into one last introduction. Nick, yes, no? Are you breathing? Epic fail.
You're also muted, Nick.
Not any. I like the blank stare.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
How about
yes?
Nope, not at all.
All right, sweet.
Who are you?
I am Nick Johnson, past master Corinthian Lodge number 67 in Big Time, Farmington, Minnesota.
Thank you, Nick.
Cheers.
Hope all is well. I'll drink to that. Let's get into Masonic news this week. We had a late-breaking one. All the good stuff comes out on Tuesdays, and today is no exception.
Just in time for this show.
Starting off, the universal lines for some interesting discussions. And interesting, unfortunately, in a negative sense, where just news out of the Grand Lodge of Georgia, their grand session is going on right now. And while there was an edict previously discussed on TMR that banned homosexuals from joining Freemasonry, the resolution to remove the language banning homosexuals from Freemasonry
in Georgia
failed. In Georgia, thank you.
So the fact of the matter is, this is no longer Drew.
Say that again.
Like, I have to wag my. This is no longer Drew Lane's fault. He was a Grand Master of Georgia last year. I have to wag my finger at every single Mason in Georgia and just be like, shame on you, because that is bullshit.
So there's a glimmer of hope because it was a very close margin. The resolution lost in a 231 to 247 vote. So there's at least a few guys, more than a few guys, who have tried to have some sense of, I don't know, decorum with this whole thing.
So just to play devil's advocate, though, for a second, has anyone actually seen the legislation? It would be the first time I voted for something that would sound really right, but the legislation was so poorly written, there was no way I could good conscience support it.
Really?
Yeah.
I've done the same. We had an amendment proposed on the floor at the Grand Lodge of Virginia, something about the American flag. And so if you read it, it's like, yeah, of course, American flag, yeah. But then when you read it, it's kind of stepping on toes of like, well, what if you have a foreign brother visiting? It seems a little ostentatious. And so while the first pass seemed like a no-brainer, when you kind of consider the unintended consequences, and it was different. But
you saw that a lot, 10 years ago or so, and even earlier during the big sweep for Prince Hall, where in an effort to try to be open and inclusive, we were basically dictating the terms to another sovereign Masonic jurisdiction for recognition without even inviting them to comment. And that's the wrong way to go about doing it. We're not doing it because it's mutually beneficial. We were doing it because we don't want to look like racists or something like that. You can't, do it for the right reasons and get those right reasons on paper. So, I mean, it's possible that those dissenting votes that beat it, it's because it codified something else that was equally abhorrent.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's probably riders or something as well. I mean, who knows? But yes, none of us have seen it. Fresh off of Hodap's blog. We'll still be talking about it next week, I'm sure, as more stuff trickles.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm still going to judge.
Because
that's what good Masons do.
Still can't hear you, Nick. Giving you one last shot.
Now can you hear me?
Yes, there we go.
All right. So, yeah, I'm going to agree with Jason on this one. And there you go.
Which Jason?
Oh, touche.
The right one.
I'm glad to have your vote of confidence.
Oh, man.
It's frustrating. I mean, there's really not much more to say that we haven't covered at length in other episodes, but time will tell.
The horse is dead. Moving on.
Speaking of death, the next topic.
That's a bad segue.
Subtle as a chainsaw.
Let's talk about another news item where the anti-Masonic comic creator Jack Chick has shuffled off this mortal coil yesterday at the age of 92. For those who don't know, Jack Chick created these things called Chick Tracts, and which is a very zealous religious pamphlet of which he decided to bash on many special interest groups, the least of which being the Freemasons. What do you guys think about this?
He was very much an equal opportunity. So he hated the Catholics, the Muslims. He hated Harry Potter. He hated Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah. I mean, I think there was one news article that called him basically the father of the Satanic Panic.
Yeah, I saw that same article. And I don't know if it's true, but it's a fitting sobriquet. I'll let him wear it.
Yeah, I've got my copy right here. That's Baphomet? What? This was the anti-Masonic one, of which let's see, we covered.
Actually, it's the reprint.
It is.
So the original tract was called "The Curse of Baphomet," and for some reason that actually got taken off the shelves and replaced with this, kinder, gentler anti-Masonic pamphlet.
So he had a conscience? I don't know.
I think he had a lawyer and money that needed to be protected.
It's amusing to say the least. A lot of logical leaps in there, a lot of logical fallacies, but he was dedicated to the cause. Godspeed.
And thanks, Chris Krasnowski, for getting me and John those tracks, because we both have a couple copies each.
Kudos for you for that. Yep. And let's see. I'm sure these guys will cover it this week. But The Past Bastard has another interesting article where we were talking
Have we just started reading off their headlines each week?
It's all the news. That's it. That's all we have.
Modap and The Past Bastard.
Till I start writing again. I mean, we can't rely on Tom to get anything ready.
Any blog at all. We'll take it.
All right, we're bringing back the burning taper.
Yes. I did read that back in the day.
What's up with the flaming pig?
According to the past master, the Grand Lodge of Missouri removes recognition from states with traditional observance lodges. So it was another TO bashing article.
I had to confess, when I saw this come across, I first saw it in the Freemasonry subreddit. I didn't catch the source. I bought it. They totally trolled me.
You didn't catch the satire tag up front?
No, I was ready to call Aaron Schumacher and others in Missouri and just like, what in the world are you guys doing? And, fortunately, the coffee kicked in and I saved myself a bunch of embarrassment.
I do think it's interesting that this is one of the first times that, an article mentions removing recognition from Washington, D.C., whereas Washington, D.C. is usually the one to remove that from others like Tennessee and Georgia.
Yeah, take that, D.C.
Yes, I love D.C.
Probably is. But we didn't talk about this last week. There was one about I'm not going to bring it up, but the one about the lodges in Arkansas. What if they formed their own Grand Lodge and sought for recognition and regularity from the United Grand Lodge of England? To see that's possible. That's a whole episode in itself. I think that's just brilliant because
that's actually a great way to go about it too. Yeah.
I mean, well, in all seriousness, I'm going to go on a little tangent here. If you think about what we learned in the African Lodge number 1 episode, where John Hairston had all this research that shows that, unbeknownst to them, Prince Hall and the what do they call it, Illustrious 15 or whatever, Immortal 15, they found out that they were raised clandestinely and sought to heal themselves and tried to do all the proper documentation and ritual to appeal to the Grand Lodge of England for a charter. So it's been done before. It's certainly plausible, so get on it. I mean, what would it take? 4 lodges in Arkansas to make it happen? Nick?
The problem's going to be the presence of another recognized lodge governing that, or Grand Lodge governing that jurisdiction.
That's the trick. It's you got to get other Grand Lodges. It's not just recognition; it's de-recognition of the existing Masonic body.
Right.
And that then you get into one of Nick and my favorites, bugaboos, to talk about ETJ.
Well, then you got Italy. I mean, Italy is the case in point. I mean, it was the real Grand Lodge of Italy, or just the Grand Lodge of Italy, whatever it is recognized by the United Grand Lodge of England, while the Grand Orient is recognized by us. And it sounds like there was some kind of backroom deal to essentially split off and create something new. So, I'm sure there's a precedent for, making things happen. So
now.
So my question is, where is that tipping point? So you splinter off, you bring Masonry back to its value system, and you kind of open the doors up for any Masons to switch over to this new Grand Lodge. At what ratio of this old Grand Lodge dying and this new Grand Lodge becoming the dominant Grand Lodge jurisdiction in the state? At what point does that reach a tipping point where it's an interesting question.
It is an interesting question. I don't think Masonic jurisprudence has dealt with it in the last 150 years.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that if UGLE just said, you're right, you 4 lodges have a better grasp of Masonry than this entire state, we're going to pull them and grant you. There's really no ratio required, right? Look at the 4 lodges that started what's known as the Grand Lodge of England.
You mean the 1 plus 3?
The 1 plus 3 little lodges, right?
In 1721?
Yes.
Yes, not 1721.
Oh, man.
Good stuff. And then, Jason, you want to talk about your installation again?
Yeah, sure. I'll probably, this is my mid-Atlantic convocation of academic lodges, John. You're just going to have to put up with it for another couple months. No, December 3rd, 10 o'clock in the morning, Clifton Presbyterian Church is Acacia's 2017 installation of officers. I am the presumed incumbent worshipful master. John and I will be there. We are live streaming it. Brother Matt Botts will be there. Brother Andre Beliveau, Frater O will be there. So there are some, it's just going to be a party and a good time. So hope you can make it. And if not, we'll be live streaming it. So there's a little bit of Masonic education here as well, where you actually get to see Virginia ritual because it's open to the public from outside of Virginia. So it's going to be really cool. I hope you enjoy it and hope you make it the opportunity to come and show up and celebrate.
Rock on. Okay, so let's transition into everyone's favorite Masonic game show, and that is the Masonic Monday question.
On Tuesday?
On Tuesday.
Hello, everybody, to another edition of your favorite... Wait, we already said all that.
We need some theme show music.
All right, so it was a really tough question. I know. I've gotten emails about how difficult this question was, and so I'm a jerk, and I apologize. But with that being said, we did get 2 correct answers. So Christopher Croto, Joshua Crockett, you guys are amazing. So the last week's question was, this short-lived Masonic side order developed in Germany, named after a parable of Jesus. Each member would wear a ring with an insignia based on a verse from St. Paul's letter to the Romans. What was the name of this Masonic side order? And that was the Order of the Grain of Mustard Seed. And the ring's inscription was, "For none of us liveth to himself, and no man dieth to himself." So congratulations, guys, on something that was really tough. So I apologize. I'll make them really easy next time. But I want to thank our very wonderful contributor, Mike Hambrecht, for this particular question. So the Masonic Monday question for the week of October 24th, 2016. Which 2 sovereign grand commanders are interred in the House of the Temple, and how many acts of Congress did it take to put them there? When you have the answers, send it to masonicmonday@gmail.com. Don't forget to include your lodge name, your lodge number, if it has one, and the hashtag StrangeIn10. Back to you, John.
You realize if you don't have a lot, Landy.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into this week's topic, which is Martinism. So we have full disclosure, none of the guests here tonight are members of a Martinist order. However, as Jason Mitchell said, he did sleep at a Holiday Inn last night. That allows him to be fully read on to all of the wondrous mysteries that appeal to this Christian esoteric order. So, Jason, will you please start us off and give us a little history of where did this thing come from? What is it?
Well, thanks, John. I'm really happy to be a part of it. Oh, did you mean the other Jason?
Yes, the smart one.
Oh.
Not the handsome one?
Oh. How about... Oh.
Soul crushed.
Oh, that hurt me a little bit. Yeah, so Martinism. And I say this knowing I'm probably one of the least qualified people in the world to talk about this, but it's the internet, so let's go for it. Martinism starts off in the 18th century, and while we often think of the 18th century being this time of the birth of rationalism, the birth of the Enlightenment, we forget that it is also the birth of Illuminism. And in that, the bosom of France, this guy named Martinez de Pasquale, and I'm not going to give you his full name, and we're going to avoid all the arguments about whether or not that was his real name or not, came up with this really interesting theology. Now, some would argue he stole it from Swedenborg or Bohm or other places, but he made it famous, so he gets the credit. With the deprivation of man, dealing with man's state following the fall, and a way to reintegrate man into this more primitive, more pure state. It's pretty radical Christian theology, more so when you consider the time it was born. And what makes it interesting to the Masonic world is he encoded it inside a Masonic rite. He actually did it twice, but the one that gets the credit, the famous one, was the Elu's Cohen. And those of the Scottish Rite, that name Elu should be jumping out at you. Elu of the 15, Elu of the 9, Elu of the 27, what the York Rite calls the Select Master degree. This was a common thing in high-grade Masonry. And so he was not unique. And he built an operative Masonic order predicated on Christian Illuminism that was, not to, let's not beat around the bush. They were practicing ceremonial magic. They were actual operative theurgists. They were summoning divine beings, or they believed they were. It was a training ground to develop those skills and those techniques. And it became the hot thing. It was quite impressive. But most people are attracted to his ideas. There was, this is France, and, this fallout, this heartbreak and breakup with the Catholic Church left them pretty stunned religiously. And they needed that anchor. They needed something. And he was one of many people offering a solution. He had two acolytes, Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin and Jean-Baptiste Willermoz, both of whom took it in new directions. They had two differing ideas, whereas Pasquale was very much into ceremonial magic, very much into theurgy. Saint Martin was a mystic in the true sense of the word. He didn't go for ritual. He didn't go for tons of ceremony. This was a contemplative tradition. This was a mystical tradition. This was supposed to be a radical change of heart. In fact, he called his ideas the way of the heart. Ultimately, his way took him away from Masonry, but not before he hooked up in Lyon with Jean-Baptiste Willermoz. Willermoz should be a pretty common name again to Scottish Rite Masons. Purportedly, he's the author of the 18th degree. He created what became the rectified Scottish Rite, as the Rite of Strict Observance in Germany was dying down. He tacked it on, or arranged for the political wind to tack it onto there. It became what we now know as the CBCS, and the rest is history in terms of Masonic Martinism. CBCS in regular forms of Masonry still exists. It's out of Switzerland. There are regular bodies of it in the United States, Germany, elsewhere around the world. So it's the only one that really continues to go.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Is this last remnant in mainstream Masonry of this Martinist influence?
It's certainly there. Now, it is probably, I say this without trying to put any sort of on it, but it is probably the most obscure of the invitational bodies. It for a long time it's self-limited its membership. It really didn't do a whole lot to advertise itself. People at Masonic Week would catch whispers of it. So it was there, it was active, and it was part of mainstream Masonry, but it wasn't a big part. You had to be someone on the national scene to know about it, or know someone in it, let alone actually ever be invited to it.
It was a real nice secret club we had. Now it's just sharing it all over the internet.
So the form of Martinism, though, that everyone knows today is the one that came out of the 19th century from Pappas and his friends. And he revived the Martinist order, or he claimed to revive it. We'll put it that way. His lineage is dubious at best. What he has done with it would really, really go against the current of what Martinez, Pasquale, or even Willermaz would have liked, but it's what there is, and it's the form that survives, so there's some value to it. And it is a 3-degree initiatic order that has been modified to a 5-degree initiatic order, those last 2 grades being largely administrative. Basically, you know, in Masonic terms, to be Worshipful Master and Grand Master. And this is the form that everyone
But no
knows and
sex
loves.
magic like OTO.
No, nothing like that.
Okay.
But this is the one that everyone knows because this is the one that got caught up in the French esoteric tradition. This is the one that informed the Golden Dawn. This is the one that defined French politics for a while after World War II. This is the form that got in the pissing match with Amorc, that made Amorc declare Masonry antithetical to Amorc. So this is the one everyone knows. This is the Hermetic one.
Because I do remember my research that AMORC has their own traditional Martinist order.
They did.
What's the relationship there?
So they absorbed what was already existing as the traditional Martinist order, which was spun off of the fallout and the succession crisis from Papus. And ultimately, Chaboseau and his lineage bonded with Amorc. Amorc subsequently remarketed it and changing it from traditional Martinist order to the Martinist order. They like that word, the. And it's grown, it's evolved. They've worked it in their own way. I'm not a member of it. I don't even have their rituals. So, for all I know, they are doing the OTO, Jason. That could be your in. But yeah, I mean, Papus's version is the one that set the standard for all Martinist orders to come. It still follows those teachings. It is still predicated on Christian Illuminism. It is still predicated on that idea of reintegration with the divine. But it does so within the context of 18th century and 19th century esotericism, the occult sciences. It blends itself into the political scene in France with the synarchy movement. And it takes on a number of dimensions that wind themselves out of Freemasonry, back into Freemasonry, regular and otherwise. And this is where you almost have to talk about the French esoteric tradition. And while we often talk about the Western esoteric tradition, that's kind of a lie. There are multiple traditions. And the French tradition, it requires you to be a Martinist. It requires you to be a member of some form of the Gnostic Catholic Church. And it requires you to be a Freemason, most of the time, Memphis and Mizraim. And that's where regular Masons run into trouble, is they think, oh, I'm going to join a Martinist order, only to find out later on, oh, there's, Memphis and Mizraim is here. We're doing that. And that's where regular Masons run into trouble, is not vetting those beforehand.
I know that if RJ were here, he's been doing some research into the history of like Memphis Mizraim in the States and how it was kind of an okay thing for a while before there was a schism. So, yeah, certainly a topic for another show. But
well, yeah, I mean, it certainly was. And the world wars, I don't think people today really understand rules. We like to think of this recognition thing as an absolute universal standard, using what we talked about earlier. Italy proves it's not. But it was, during World War I, World War II, American GIs overseas, there really was no concern as to whether or not that lodge you were going to was, regular or not. You went to lodge because you needed some sort of respite from the terrors of the war. And no one was going to think twice about it. And that caused a lot of bleed over. And we forget that. We try to sweep that under the rug and pretend it never happened. But it absolutely did happen, and it formed Masonic politics here for a long time. But yeah, that's where Martinism comes in today. And there are literally hundreds of variations and twists and innovations and jams upon Papus's idea of taking a 1-degree system, blossoming it to a 3-degree system, and ultimately evolving into a 5-degree system of chivalric Christian Illuminism. And that's the common theme between all of them, is that chivalric Christian Illuminism. I don't know that you'd have to be a Christian to join all the Martinist orders, but in a lot of ways, it would be lost on you if you weren't a Christian. I mean, the idea of it is grounded inside a Christian ontology. That there's that great quote from Ephesians about becoming the sons of light and putting on the armor of light, and that's Christian. That's a great summary of Christian Illuminism right there. And if you aren't a Christian, that sense is kind of lost on you.
Mm-hmm. Now, you bring up a point.
Yeah.
As the other question I had was, we know that some of the founders of Martinism were Rosicrucians. We know that Pappas definitely had an influence. He was a member of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. We talked about Memphis Mizraim. For a lot of these Christian orders, where does Martinism fall apart, or how is it different than, say, Rosicrucianism? Right? They're all Christian orders.
Yeah. And that's a good question. I look at the French tradition, right, and it's built on those 3 pillars: the Gnostic Church, okay, a chivalric order, okay, that kind of makes sense. The Church militant, and then a Masonic. A lot of these bleed over into each other. They cross. The progressions are weird. And we're not even getting to the fact that the leadership and administration is often the same people. They're just playing musical chairs. So there's some, I personally don't know where or why there was a need for a Rosicrucian order and a Martinist order and a Templar order and a Gnostic Church.
I'm sure there's some listeners right now that say, hey, maybe this kind of appeals to me, but when you have a whole buffet of options of side orders and independent bodies to join, how do you, without knowing, set them kind of apart? So that's kind of what the root of my question was.
I feel like you're talking about the York Rite in general.
Touche.
Yeah. Well,
by the way, the Masonic Week schedule's out. Go check out yorkrite.org.
It is. You and I were talking earlier before the show, John. Contrasting Martinism versus historic Rosicrucianism. The Tibbinian circle of Rosicrucians. These guys wanted to change the world, and that's what they were. That's what it was meant to be. It was a continuation of the Reformation. They looked at what happened with Luther and the Catholic Church as kind of the test case of, we did this, let's go big. And that was their goal. And, it failed miserably. Bessold, who was kind of the head of this, Andre Valentine basically called Rosicrucianism a farce on his deathbed. And he later on wrote Christianopolis, which was a whole nother vision of this world reformed in Christ. The difference, I think, is scale. Martinism, whereas those Rosicrucian ideas, they operated on a macro level, the general reformation of the world. Martinism takes it to the micro level, the general reformation of the individual.
So it's very Gnostic in that sense.
In the loosest definition of the term Gnostic, yes.
It seems very much closer to mysticism in general, that concept of...
It can. You have to talk about which version of Martinism, though, you're considering, right?
Sure.
There was an absolute hierarchy of priesthood under Martinez. The Ilus Cohen saw themselves as a priesthood. And their, for lack of a better term, Pope was Pasquale. He was the guy at the top. You were vetted by him. There was, for lack of a better comparison, apostolic succession from him. You had to prove your faith in order to advance into the highest grades of the Red Cross under him. So that version certainly wasn't Gnostic at all. It's just replacing one pope for another. whereas St. Martin's was very Gnostic. And then you have Willermaz's, which was entirely chivalric. It was based on these knightly orders. It was, if anything, it was a warrior, almost a warrior nobility kind of theme, which wouldn't have any sort of Gnostic bent to it at all. So it manifested itself in very different ways. The commonality was they're all aimed at the individual. Instead of making the world a better place, we'll make each individual better. And once we've done that, we've checked all those boxes. By default, we've made the world a better place. So two different ways to achieve the same goal. And that's really the best way I can express the difference between, let's say, Rosicrucianism and Martinism. But after Papists, those delineations fall apart. In the modern sense of the Hermetic or occult orders, all those lines are blurred. Everything's the same.
Fair point.
It becomes really hard. Levy, sorry, it wasn't even his idea, but he published it. His book on high magic really was a first attempt at creating a unified theory of ceremonial magic and occultism based on the Kabbalah, and he attached all these other systems to it. And from that, micro, macro doesn't matter anymore. It's a unified theory. Physics, hopefully one day we'll get there, and quantum mechanics and gravitational mechanics will be the same.
Yeah, using the micro macro analogy, economists rarely go out and say, "Well, I'm a macro economist." I guess you could argue either way, but they're special.
No, they just want to fight about Keynes.
That's right. Austrian all the way.
I'm in the Austrian school myself, but
as all Hermetic philosophers are.
Yeah, but you ask a great question. What appeal would this have to someone? If they've already got a church and they've already got a lodge and they've already got some chivalric thing. It could be Sovereign Military Order of the Temple. It could be Masonic KT or something else. What does Martinism offer that isn't offered anywhere else? And the answer is maybe nothing. A lot of this comes down to, well, why did you join this lodge versus that lodge? Well, I know these guys.
Mm-hmm. True.
And that plays a huge factor into it. Most of the Martinist orders, however, I think, unlike, let's say, the Golden Dawn system, which has become increasingly one, thalamic, and B, a lot of the Martinist orders avoid that push. They are very conservative. They embrace the idea that this is Christian Illuminism, not general Illuminism. And that could be very appealing for a lot of people. KT, the Grand Encampment, tried to do that a couple years ago. It went wrong in probably all the ways it could, and that's not to say, to put blame on anyone. But there was something to be said when the Grand Commander the Grand Master of KT at the time said there's this increasing interest in chivalric Christian Illuminism, and maybe we want to look at being a body that offers a way to explore that, because people may not have it anywhere else.
Cool. Nick, Jason, you have anything else before we cut to social media?
Yeah, I only have one question, and you discussed it earlier, the CBCS. Now, obviously, it had disappeared from view. It was essentially just almost a supper club at that time. Is that essentially the only true rite of Martinism that exists in Masonry, at least in the United States, or how does that? I'm just trying to understand how these threads kind of wound themselves through all these different rites.
It's if I look at the 18th degree of the Southern jurisdiction, and I put that caveat on there because I don't know what anyone else has, both in its current form and the forms under Pike, before Pike. If I look at some older French versions of it, and then I contrast that against the rituals that have been made available for Martinism, both online through the Grand College of Rites and other places, you do see some commonalities there. You certainly see an influence. The idea of the book of nature and deciphering nature's hieroglyphics is a common theme in both of them. Absolutely a common theme in both of them. And that echoes what St. Martin had in Errors in Truth and Man and His Ministry. So on the one hand, you could argue that, well, you may not be a Martinist in the fact that you belong to a Martinist order, but as a Mason in the U.S. or elsewhere that's part of that Hutz grade lineage, you certainly have received degrees that were directly influenced by that philosophy. There's no way getting around that. It's just the nature of the beast. I mean, French Hutz grade Masonry was a melting pot. It was, in some ways, American before it was American. They would play and change and bounce ideas off each other in really awesome ways. Even the Scottish Rite itself, when Warren put it together, put together his rite of the Order of the Royal Secret, it really was a greatest hits collection of everything that was selling in the Burgundy region at the time. And a lot of these, these degrees, he didn't even have the right rituals for them when he first put together. He just had a list of degrees. I want this and this and this, and they're going to go here and here and here and here. And even after the fact, he played and he modified and he changed the order and he restructured. So yeah, there was a lot of cross-pollination. There was a lot of influence. So for those who, want to say, oh, I want to be a Martinist, and they don't want to join a Martinist order, you've been touched by it in some very indirect ways and some other ways that are very direct. If you're in the Golden Dawn, you can't get away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Of the fall of man. And that was the core feature of Martinism, was overcoming the fall of man.
Interesting.
So even if you're in the OTO, well, you've got some Martinism in there.
So we have some great questions on social media, so I want to make sure we get to those. So, Jason, will you check out our Facebook page?
Yes, already there. So
the other Jason.
Oh,
yes, the handsome one.
Handsome Jason? That's it.
Oh.
The one with hair. Yeah, I went there. Yeah, I'm bitter. I probably shouldn't diss guests on the show. So, Brother Taylor Kleinneck asked the question, so with so many Martinist groups, are there any particularly pernicious groups out there?
Yes. There are bad people everywhere, and there are individuals or groups that will always try to take your money. They will always turn it into a cult. They will always turn it into a way of supporting their own ego. I really don't want to start going and giving a list right here of everything that's good or bad. But things you can look out, you could absolutely look out for and talk about. People should be able to, in any esoteric group, there should never be secrets in terms of talking about what it means to be in this group, what's the leadership structure like, the standard things that you would ask of anything. You should be able to openly talk to someone, and they should be able to give you an actual, an honest answer, not an evasive one, not a hedge. They should flat out be able to say, this is what we're about, this is what we do, this is how we go about doing it, etc.
Right.
And if
I'll add to that too, though, that some of the research I had is that while some of the traditional Martinist orders do have teachings of the ceremonial magic, it also does include the dark magic as well, black magic as well. So it's not all the good happy stuff that you use at own risk kind of stuff as well. So that could be
unfortunately, in the post-19th century occult hermetic world, when everything got unified, unfortunately that meant that that philosophy was extended to a way that groups that you would think wouldn't go down the shadow path or the left-hand path do. and not in just a theoretical, defense against the dark arts kind of way.
Well, it's always that same kid that you play tabletop RPGs with, and he's like, "I'm going to be a necromancer." You immediately say, "You're out of here. Get out of my house, because you're going to steal my TV. Get the hell out of my house."
Only we had listened to Jack, listen to Jack Chick.
That's it. Have any Cheetos?
But yeah, so there are pernicious ones out there. Talk to them, and if it's something you want to pursue, talk to them, find out, ask them, put them on the spot, make them think. And if your gut says no, then go with your gut. And if you're the type of person that has a history of making bad decisions, well, run it by a friend. Get their opinion on it. There are regrettably bad people out there, and it really doesn't matter if they call themselves Martinists or mob, members. They're looking out for themselves, and you're just a tool to that end.
Next question.
So yeah, Taylor also wants you to start your own podcast, Jason. But moving on to
is he sponsoring? Does he have money?
I don't know. So, brother TC Johnson asks, "Hey, newbie Mason question. I see that the Rosicrucian Martinist order requires applicants to be Freemasons, but I've never heard of these guys in the same discussions, which include Scottish Rite and York Rite. So is the Rosicrucian Martinist order an independent body, or is the Masonic requirement simply something they self-impose?"
I looked them up, and they actually say on there that you do not have to be a Freemason. They were very clear about that you can be a Freemason. You just don't have to worry about it because it's not a Masonic side order, which I assume means that there's at least one or two Freemasons working within that group. So,
in all cases, consult your Grand Lodge. There's no universal rule as to what is or isn't, acceptable across the board. So, yeah, talk to your Grand Lodge, find out what they have to say. But that does kind of touch back to what I was saying about the French esoteric tradition, which did have, and still does, that Masonic component. You don't see it enforced too much here in the U.S. It's not a thing. We're Americans. We don't like being told what to do. But yeah, that stems right out of that need for that, that triune nature of the French esoteric tradition: church, chivalry, and Masonry.
Great. So brother Blake Miles Leach from Australia says it's boggling that the RER hasn't made more inroads in the USA other than just having a passing thing at Masonic Week.
It really varies. And I don't pretend to know everything about the order. I do see differences from where I sit in Masonry. On the Western U.S., the Great Priory of America and those lodges are very active. I mean, they meet, they do degrees, they do their business, they go about doing their thing. And, admittedly, it may only be about 10 years they've been doing it, but they are. Compared to the East Coast, you don't see that much. Now, they could absolutely be just as busy and everything is super sub rosa and no one's ever going to know. But I wouldn't put my money on that. So it's going to vary. I mean, on the West Coast, yeah, people will talk about it. They will admit that it exists. They will, the Great Priory has a website. It's out there, right? And it's not like they're trying to hide it per se. But I do think they probably, like any Masonic organization, did themselves a disservice. When you become a past Grand Masters Club and you don't bring in anyone new and you only meet once a year and it's just a dinner club, it's a recipe for death. You're going to wither away and die. It doesn't matter if you're CBCS, A&D, or your local Blue Lodge. You become a zombie organization. Eventually, people are going to die off. And Great Priory, or excuse me, the Grand Army of the Republic, it waited until the bitter end, and when the last guy died, they shut it down, because what else are you going to do? They weren't bringing in anyone new.
So let's see. Brother Michael Overturf is kind of veering off of Martinism and going more toward Rosicrucianism. He's saying, or he asked the question, isn't Rosicrucianism's based, only a creator and not necessarily a given religion or dogma?
So, I mean, I love the way Tobias Churton put this, and he's actually quoting Christopher McIntosh, discussing, well, what is Rosicrucianism? It started here. It started in Tübingen, Germany, but you look at it now, and it's so much different. And it was described as a rolling stone that gathers much moss and of many hues. And you throw something into a stone in the pond, the ripples are going to go everywhere, and they're going to change, and they're going to be different. And eventually, if you come back later, you're not going to see the original stone. You're just going to see the ripples that are in there now. So to compare Rosicrucianism now with Martinism now, you have to make sure that you're understanding that a Rosicrucian order or a Martinist order sometimes is just in the name. It's just a marketing term. It could be a term by, just baggage, F&AM versus AF&AM. So if you find a Rosicrucian order that says, oh, this is what we are, or this is what Rosicrucianism is, you have to understand that that's what their definition of Rosicrucianism is versus someone else's or someone else's or someone else's. And that makes it hard. It makes it hard to compare apples and oranges. It makes it hard to contrast. And you end up doing like we've done tonight, where we can speak in really broad generalities. Meanwhile, there's some guy out there who's a member of some Martinist order going, but you got it wrong, you got it wrong, you got it wrong. Well, for you, I may have it wrong on the grand scheme of the last, we'll round up 300 years of history. It's a stone that rolls, that gathers much moss and of many hues. Martinism as an idea has wound itself around a lot of different things, and in and out of groups, and in and out of situations and countries and cultures and contexts, and it fractures and it merges and it changes, and it's a tough thing to come out and say, oh, this is what it is, and make every single person happy. It's just not possible. So, I mean, it would be better to say, for his question, this Rosicrucian order and this Martinist order have two different things. What's going on? I guess is my long way to get, circle back to that.
Going on. All right. Thank you very much, Jason Mitchell, for chiming in and giving us that light for the evening. Let's go over to Nick Johnson for his final thoughts and shameless plugs.
Well, I was really glad that we decided to talk about Martin Short's career. It was a great. Martinism. I was actually reading some books on Christian mysticism, and I guess we didn't really get into it, but I found it very fascinating, this concept of logos and Christ being at the center of it. This man of divinity and this divine being of man, and I thought it was really interesting to read that, and then understanding how you have this vision here looking at you, and then you're going towards this unity concept. And I don't know if that's present within Martinism. I don't know, but I really enjoyed reading about that, because it wasn't so much empowering my faith as much it was giving me a sense that you can find the divine within nature, within everything that you're looking at, everything that you're feeling within you. And so I really found it really fascinating. So with that, I don't really have much else to say, because I'm glad Jason brought it tonight. So I'm Nick Johnson, millennialfreemason.com. I got to get some stuff up there on that blog. That thing is starting to turn into a windswept prairie. So
yeah, I don't know that you can call yourself a blogger anymore.
I do one every quarter, so I think that's technically okay. So
we'll have to consult with Cory Doctorow.
Sounds good to me. He'll just be like, what's a Masonic? All right, back to you guys.
All right, we'll go to Will Wheaton instead.
Nice. All right, Jason Richards.
Hey, I just want to thank Brother Jason Mitchell for coming on to the show tonight and putting up with all of us, mostly me. I learned a ton. Christian mysticism especially is something that I have not delved a lot into, but through the shows on Martinism and Rosicrucianism and Gnosticism, it's something that's quite interesting, and it's really neat to learn about. So I just wanted to say thanks, Brother Jason, for taking the time to explore this really interesting topic with us.
One of these days, Jason, I'm going to take out the lunch. I'm going to dive you deep into all the Christian mysticism text.
Oh, you're talking to this Jason again and not the other one?
So
I'm confused.
The smart Jason. Smart Jason. Any final thoughts?
Yay. You know, it's a tough topic, this one. And, you know, when Nick asked me, I really kind of started stressing about how am I going to go about presenting this? Because it's such a wide angle. You know, we're not talking about a Martinist group or, you know, a particular point in history. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. And there's a real big body of documentation around it. And there's a lot of thought around it, and it doesn't all agree, and it doesn't all point to one place. You know, but one thing I think would probably, you know, we need to draw some clear lines on, you know, is Martinism Masonry? Hasn't been for centuries, at least in the U.S. You know, it's not Masonry. They played together, you know, they've left their marks on each other, but no more than you could say that, you know, in the U.S., you know, Grand Masters are, you know, we elect a new one every year, whereas you look at England, it's very, you know, it's the royal family, you know, that's who the Grand Master is. You know, there's cultures that impact and inform each other. But that's one thing that, you know, I want people to take away is understand that Martinism is not Masonry. Masonry is not Martinism. And just keep that in mind, especially when someone comes and says, hey, you know, you should do this. It'll really further your Masonic career. Why? You know, that's, you know, going back to your pernicious comment, you know, always be skeptical. The last thing, you know, when it comes to this is there's a ton of documentation out there. Most of it falls into the Romantic school. I would always suggest you start with the authentic school, start with the history, and the European Society for the Study of Esotericism under Nicholas Goodrich Clark. Well, he recently passed away, but he was kind of the head of it. They have a tremendous body of knowledge and a tremendous body of research on this that is ethically informed and can help guide you and give you a real good idea of understanding what was going on, especially in the historical context. And it will open your eyes Masonically, it'll open your eyes in terms of history. At least for me, in researching these topics over the years, it certainly opened my mind in terms of faith. And a lot of the things that I thought were absolutely true were at least caused me to question them. And I'm always open to that.
I'll second that. That's for sure. So thanks again, Jason, for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is very enlightening. I learned a lot tonight, especially about Steve Martin's career and his history of SNL. So that was
yes.
So, yeah.
Two wild and crazy guys.
Love it. But actually, for those keeping track, this
King Tut.
This is actually
nice.
It's a really special night because if you're watching live on October 25th, 2016, this is actually the 100th anniversary of the death of Pappas, who we've been talking about tonight. Gerard and
That's true.
So, coincidence? Maybe. But
we planned it.
Yeah, but I've been fascinated lately with a lot of Christian mysticism, how it relates to Masonry, how it's Masonry's kind of a jump off point. I like to use RJ's analogy of, that the lodge is kind of the waiting room for you to explore different topics, and this is really scratching my itch right now. So I'm gonna go read some more Martinist orders on the internet and see how it applies. So that's all I got. Thank you very much for watching, and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.